Someone from a only tequila shots. Left, and we'll get underway here. And I'd like to call the Monday, July 8th meeting of the City of Lawrence Affordable Housing Advisory Board to order. And we have a quorum. We have a lot to do today. I'll begin by asking if there are any members of the public who'd like to make any comments. Seeing none, we'll move to our first agenda item, which is to review our NOFA applications. I want to make a few preliminary comments first and encourage some discussion before we get into the particulars of each of our applicants. First of all, I was guilty of a blunder in not filling out 2 of the cells on my score sheets. Now, you would have had a hard time figuring that out if you tried to print off my score sheets. I had no idea that when I sent my score sheets to folks that they were going to come out printing the way they did, but I obviously did something different than everyone else did. I just took camera photos of my score sheets and sent them in. And then when I tried to print them, I got like 1/8 of a page. So the components that you didn't see were my alignment with stated goals scores for Habitat for Humanity and for Independence. I had left those cells blank, intending to go back and complete them, and forgot to fill them in before I sent in photos of my scoring sheets. We have updated calculations, which we'll talk about in just a moment, that include those numbers. We also have some additional information from staff showing the score sheets with one of the components for the capital projects removed concerning financial feasibility, so that we had a more comparable scoring between the capital and non-capital projects. And staff will review those numbers with us in just a moment. Let's see, what else do I need to mention before we get some staff input? I do want to remind folks that the NOFA materials are designed very intentionally. And one of the components that I don't want us to overlook as we consider these applications is we write in our notification of funding availability, mentioned that we were looking for projects that could be implemented or executed in 2019. So some of these projects might fall outside, one or more of those projects might fall outside of that scope. So that's one factor that I want us to be mindful of as we're doing our review. Scott, who do we have that wants to review our updated numbers for us and talk about how that shifts a little bit some of the scoring?
I think I can.
Okay.
With the help of our team, Brad really helped compute this toward the last hour. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. What we did, and hopefully this proves helpful for you, is we compiled the scores based on the revised score that Mr. Gacious gave us this morning, and including all of the scoring elements, including the construction feasibility. I think one of the issues is you have one non-capital project with the Housing Authority and Family Promise. What we probably should have discussed a little bit stronger before this process started was how you're going to compare those two categories. We built the scoring matrix, I believe, in order to compare in each category applications. So you have several capital applications that score against each other. You only have one non-capital application that stands alone from that. So that may be a discussion you want to have, is how you're going to kind of work out, is that a policy kind of discussion or is it a scoring discussion? If it becomes a scoring discussion, then you have a scoring table that removes the construction feasibility component of it. And you end up with a different list of scores. I will show you that, I don't know if you would like to maybe jot this down or not, but the comparison here, actually I'll put, if you look at the final tally of ranking just solely based on score, you'll see that the top three, Habitat, Tennis to Homeowners, and Wheatland, shift in their ranking but remain the top three, and then the others below that change up a little bit as well, with Independence Inc. When removing the construction feasibility going from 4 to 5. Housing Authority Family Promise, going from 6 to 4th, so it moves up when you take away that construction feasibility. So that construction feasibility was intended to reflect, I think, part of that immediacy, part of your notice of funding availability. But that's what those two tables do, just so you're aware, and for what it matters. And with that, I'm happy to stand for any other questions.
Any questions for Scott about this item or any other items? Any of the materials we've received from staff? Scott, seeing none, thank you. I also want to give members of the board an opportunity to ask any representatives of any of the applicants if they have any other questions. Any questions for any of the applicants? Seeing none, I think we're ready to jump into this then. Diane, any recommendations on how we proceed?
I think, Mr. Chair, that that's kind of up to the board to discuss. You've got these materials here. I guess the general guidance that I would give you is what's outlined in your policy, that with these recommendations, you're to make some clear commentary on why you are recommending what you're recommending. And then would remind the board that the policy also does specifically say that, you know, you're going to discuss these as a group, and the scoring is a tool, but it isn't the only tool for your discussion. I think those are the only couple things that I would, unless anybody else has something else.
I would just add that you did see a couple of course communications that we posted based on staff's recommended scores. There may be another question or two that come out from the board about how we arrived at those scores as well, but we put those out there and to add some context and add some information about each category there.
Okay. Who'd like to jump in and begin?
I have a question, I
Yes,
guess, to
ma'am.
help us start. On the Penn Street lofts,
Yes.
it was my understanding that they weren't specifically truly asking for an award as far as what he said in his presentation for this round, but he just asked that we score them, so I wonder if they're truly under consideration at this time.
I would, personally, I would score them, I'm not intending to support funding for them this round because I don't believe it's a timely application. Given where they're at in the process, we don't know when they might break ground. Could very likely be next year, in which case they're going to have a funding round that they could make application for later this year, or maybe in 2020, depending on what the timeline actually becomes. It does, you raise the issue of Penn Street lofts. I'd like to raise a second issue associated with the Penn Street lofts issue, and would apply also to the Wheatland issue. Both of these are projects that are federal tax credit eligible projects. They are designed around the requirements, the specific requirements of that tax credit program. And good news, the tax credit has done exactly what it was intended to do. It has stimulated investors to pursue these projects. Now, they're both, what's the acronym of LIHTC?
Yes.
They're both LIHTC projects, but they're very different projects. One is a mixed-use project that exists in what is already a mixed-use area of town. It's going to have a significant number of affordable housing units. It's my understanding, and if this is not correct, I'd like be clarified. But it's my understanding that in order to meet those LIHTC requirements, they've already established or committed to a number of affordable housing units. So and the other project, the Wheatland project, is a very modest, completely different looking residential development in what is currently the edge of a residential neighborhood here at the edge of the city of Lawrence. Very different project, but also already committed to affordable housing units as a component part of its application for the LIHTC tax credit. My question is, for discussion by the board, should we be putting affordable housing trust fund dollars into projects that have already been stimulated by another incentive and appear nearly certain to be built? It's the broader question that you have on any kind of economic development project that asks for an incentive. But for the trust fund dollars, would the project be built? I would like to hear comments on whether that's a component that ought to be considered in our deliberations, and if so, in what way? Should we? Yes. You look ready for a comment.
I think that,
Thank you, Tom.
I mean, I think the funds coming from those LIHTC funds, I mean, it has done what it said. I agree with what you're saying there. I think there are some pretty worthy projects that we're trying to consider here that don't have that same leg up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we should probably consider those, but I think that those that don't have the funds coming from LIHTC that might be a merit on there instead of a merit towards, a credit towards that.
Yeah, as I was doing this exercise here, the words in my mind along that line are perceived need. I mean, who needs this money to make it happen? And it's kind of what you're saying, there's other funding available for some of these projects that, was gonna carry it on forward. And so who really could benefit more quickly and more substantially from money that we are going to disperse?
I think, some of them merit consideration. If we can go from a 30-year affordable situation to a permanently affordable situation in some of these LIHTC projects, because the LIHTC only requires a 30-year requirement, if we can go to permanent, then we have gained something for our dollars. So I think there's a component there. We should get something for the dollars we input into these projects. Permanent affordability would be one. So I think that's worth consideration at least. The thing about these two projects, both the Wheatland and the Penn Lofts, neither one of them needed funds in this round of funding, could accept funds in future rounds of funding. So in my humble opinion, I would say please come back to the next round and let us fund these projects that are ready to go right now. Consider the projects that are ready to go right now. If, in November, we're gonna be back at the table with another NOFA, and there's another opportunity where we're gonna have $750,000 to distribute, or whatever that number is, I would probably set those two aside right at the beginning, because they said they didn't need funds out of this round.
And can I ask a question based on
And
that?
Penn didn't even make a request,
Right.
period.
Right.
Yes.
So you said that whatever that number is supposedly gonna be, didn't we have like an estimate of what the number might be in our next round? And I couldn't recall what we think.
Yeah, I know staff had prepared a projection. Danielle, you recall?
I don't think we had an identified figure. Part of it depends, a little bit of what we talked about, it was that it depends on the timing, and when the NOFA goes out and how much cash is available at that point in time. So it really just depends on when the board is interested in having that NOFA be released.
We're generating about $75,000 a month.
I think we
in
got
sales tax.
74,000 last month.
74?
Mhm.
That's about.
Yeah, so that's, yeah,
Okay.
in that neighborhood,
Okay.
yeah, is what we can, I think, expect.
So 6 months could be $450,000.
And we did have, so the transfer from the general fund is 350,000. This request is for 250,000, so there is $100,000 in there as well,
Okay.
in addition to that.
Thank you.
Is
Six
that
or
helpful?
seven.
Yes, Edith?
I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I am curious about the Wheatland project, however, in that it is for 55 and up, which was
Seniors.
noted in our housing study as an increasing need.
Right.
So that might, even though they may not, that may make it slightly different,
Right,
even though they have additional funding.
I agree.
I just want to note that. The other thing about Penn Street Lofts, as I recall in their proposal or in their document, their average, when they talked about affordability, their average was 60%. When they talked about what's the acronym, the AMI, AMI was not 30, and ours is 30, and they're talking about 60 as their average,
Right.
which is twice what we have said. And that's significant. Even though it's mixed use, it is twice what we have counted as our affordability, as their average.
Mr. Chair, just
Yes,
to
sir.
clarify if I could on that point, the AMI, the official percent that the board has landed on is 80% of area median income as a target. But then there's been a lot of discussions about 30 to 60 and 30 to 80% being something that you're interested in too, with 30% and less really being the highly subsidized, a lot of wraparound services, a lot of support to really support that, that category resident. And so I just want to kind of clarify where the goals and the levels have been out of your retreats and such.
I'd like to make an observation and just hear what this group has to say about it, is that both of the projects that have tax credits are a significant number of bedrooms. And my question is, if we take tax credits out of the game, if we say that we should consider it, but not as much as, will that slow our growth towards the number of affordable housing units? I think to look at, so I'm just interested to hear what people say. I have another opinion on that, but I'm interested to hear us talk about that a little bit.
I think for me, that gets to the very nature of the but-for issue. And were these projects stimulated by the sales tax vote 18 months ago, by Lawrence citizens to earmark some funds for affordable housing? I'm going to guess not. Does that mean we should exclude them? I don't think necessarily so, but I want confidence that the investment of public funds that we're making is giving us something more. And I think Monty said it earlier, if we could take units that were under LIHTC 30 years affordable and somehow reclassify them so that we knew they were going to remain affordable units, that's a distinguishing feature that could come from the availability of trust fund dollars, city trust fund dollars.
Yeah, or if they were gonna serve 60% AMI, and we can get them to say a certain number of units are 30% AMI.
Yeah.
Or I think we should get, and I don't wanna take that off the table at all, because I look at that as they found another matching source. They're doing exactly what we asked them to do.
They
To
are.
find another source to fund this, and You know, so if we can help them get over the finish line, I think there's value in that. Or, you know, if they can say, you know, without trust fund dollars, it's 48 units, with it, it's 60 units. Or, you know, if they give us something like that, where we're taking it further, we're getting something we want, we're serving a needed population, whatever that
Yeah.
added
There's an
value
incremental
is, there's an
benefit to the
incremental added
community
value
in exchange for the local
that these
dollars.
trust funds bring to those projects. I'm
Yeah.
100% for it.
I apologize for speaking over.
No,
you.
that's-
And I think to that point, one of the things that, so we want impact in 2019, so these aren't impact in 2019 projects. But we also had talked as a group about lessons learned from this and what the next NOFA might look like. And so to that point exactly, I think that's something we could ask for in the next round in terms of, in the submissions, to further develop some of what Monty just talked about in terms of if there is another source of funds, what is it, obviously LIHTC, and if all of those things, so that we would understand the affordability units and permanently affordable versus not. And so I think they're both excellent proposals and do meet a lot of our goals, but they don't have the impact for this calendar year, so I don't particularly want to consider them for the $250,000 pool of money we have today.
Yeah, as far as talking about those two in particular, I remember during the presentations last week that Wheatland representative was very interested in conversation about making their units permanently affordable, very
Right.
open to that.
So open to it.
Yeah, and so, it was my impression that Penn Street representative was not quite so interested in that. Now, I may have misinterpreted, it could be a question we ask, like you just mentioned, so.
Personally, struggle with the thought of if a project will happen regardless of our dollars, would it be, would we then be able to put it into our catalog of housing units we provided under our dollars, you know, if it was going to happen or not without our dollars? Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
can we put those
Yeah.
number of units
As
in our
our
portfolio
impact.
saying we provided these units with our dollars?
Yeah, and that,
I just struggled with that.
that actually stimulates the idea that, you know, we could throw a lot of little money into a handful of big projects that were already gonna take place, and then claim victory and go home.
Take credit.
I think our voters and taxpayers would sniff that out pretty quick, as not maybe being the best use of their dollars. This is the beginning, I think, of what's going to become a very nuanced discussion for us over the next few months. My impression is we're still really new at understanding how to best utilize these public dollars to impact affordable housing issues. That's not, I don't think we've made any mistakes. I've told folks that have asked me casually the last week, what are you gonna do with these projects? You know, what are your favorites? And I've told them, I don't know, but any of the 6 are worthy. You know, they all contribute significantly. Even the more modest request contribute significantly to the goals that we've set for ourselves. So, good news, we've stimulated the kind of proposals that we've wanted. Tough part is now we only have $250,000 available. We've got to decide how to allocate it and do it in the best interest of the public that contributed funds.
So let me offer I'm going to data perspective for a while. I'm not marrying it just yet, which as an elected official sounds really dangerous, but you know, I think we have to be cautious of our proclivity to see outside other investments, that financial leverage that we're talking about. We sort of said, well, if it's a nonprofit, they really, really need it. And are we dismissing the funds that they have collected through private donations and things like that and comparing it to tax credits? I mean, those are pools of money that, and what I want to make sure is, and maybe it's just for a more, like you say, nuanced discussion. I don't want to put a chilling effect on the development community because they're they're seeing that we're actually, they went out and got other funding, you know, in order to leverage to make the project work.
Right.
That's exactly what some of our other applicants did. They just did it in a different way. Are we leaning one way or another? I just think for us to take time to consider both, you know, tax credits aren't bad and, you know, it's just another form of leverage. I was really compelled by some of the private developers' discussion about how they have enough money to do these projects and all the pieces that it's gonna take.
And I'm also very impressed with the relatively lower amount of Housing Trust Fund dollars requested per bedroom on some of those projects. I mean, the metrics are really startling. On the Wheatlands Bethel Phase 2, it's 3,571. Tenants to homeowners, it's about $8,800 per bedroom versus $3,600 for 70 bedrooms. So the scales, as the projects scale up, then the leverage factors increase pretty significantly.
Those are different kinds of products too, though. You're looking at
They are.
single-family homes versus
Mhm.
rental units.
Mhm.
So that's a little hard to just straight up compare numbers.
Yeah,
but-
they're
but
not
there
apples
is,
to
it is,
apples.
it
yeah.
is, it's something to definitely look at. 'Cause
Mhm.
you do see the larger projects that are rentals are gonna have lower cost per unit. Because
Mhm.
it costs,
Mhm. Cost
give
to
or take
construct.
$70,000
Yeah.
to build a rental unit versus, you know, I don't know, 180 to 200 to build a single-family home.
Mhm.
So that's why you're,
Mhm.
I mean, that's part of that difference in what you're seeing there. So proportionally, it'd be better to look at a proportion of the total unit cost that we're subsidizing, maybe. I don't know if we'd ever get that. I'm not suggesting we change it, but that'd probably be a better comparison. Percentage of the total cost of the unit itself
Mhm.
per unit. All right.
Other comments, questions, proposals?
So, I have another comment on the family promise thing. When the city staff sent out the score for the financial assistance, that was based on a ratio that included the funding they received in the last pool of requests. So it made it look like it was a one-to-one funding. So if you exclude what they received in the last round of funding from this board, that changed their score, which I'm not sure we should, I question whether we should, I'm asking, I guess, whether we should, you know, if somebody had another source of money that they've already obtained and they're coming back to the well, just because it came from us, does it count against them? Because that essentially skewed their score from a 1 to a 3 on the funding portion. Something this board probably ought to think about. If a project, because we're gonna run across it again, if we fund Penn Lofts and we fund that out of 2 funding cycles, they're gonna see the same thing because they will have gotten a allocation from this board before that's gonna fix into their ratios. So I just think something we ought to address at this point, maybe. Basically the way the staff scored it, if you use their scores on the funding, it lowered their score by 2 points in that funding category. So just something we ought to consider, and I don't know if it has a huge impact today or not.
But it's something that, as we go down the line.
As we go down the line, it's gonna come up again if we do multiple, if people ask for funding for multiple allocations.
Yeah, and
We're gonna run into
likely to
this.
see the same applicants.
Right, and we're
Time
gonna
after
see the
time.
same applicants, yeah, possibly same project. So,
And,
does that make sense?
Yeah.
Follow that?
well, I'm looking at their description of how they would use the funds. Page 5 of their application, Housing Authority and Family Promise requesting $100,000 in funding to support New Horizons Transitional Housing Program, which is the same program they received funds in November.
Last time, right?
Yeah, they would utilize $50,000 to pay for direct tenant-based rental assistance,
Vouchers.
including up to $1,000 per household and 5% administrative costs. And then the other $50,000 be used to support second year of the full-time housing stability case manager to provide services to those residents.
Right.
Which, you know, in our discussion in November of last year, we talked about how important we thought it was to
Right.
improve the effectiveness of the housing programs by supporting some service, wraparound services as well. So this is second year funding for the staff person. This is where we have the disadvantage of having to exile our board members that are actually involved in these projects. I assume the staff member is funded for the current calendar year, and this request is for 2020, but I don't know that for certain. Scott?
I believe
Yes.
that's.
Anyone?
Hi.
Yes, ma'am.
I think the staff member was hired in February, so we would have that for another year starting March.
Of
into
2020.
2020, so.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm going to jump in here on this.
Sure.
You know, this is a program that I think the Housing Authority was asked to put together,
Mhm.
and then it was not fully funded. So in the last time, we didn't fund them by about $110,000. The request got cut. The city commission then came back to us and said, why didn't you fund that? You know, we had that whole go around. And they're coming back really at this point to ask for the rest of the funding that they didn't receive to take this program out 2 years instead of 1 year. I feel strongly about the program. I took it upon myself to meet with Shannon, Dana, and Rebecca outside of this group individually and ask them about this program, and they feel strongly about it. And not that they can carry their vote or anything, but there needs to be. I don't really feel like the trust fund is the place that this program should be funded. Maybe we fund it this time to carry out, you know, to carry out this 2 years, but there needs, I'd love to see this board try to recommend to the city council to find a different funding source for this program. I don't know what that looks like, but I feel like the trust fund is to put housing units on the ground for people to be able to live in. That's what I think we ought to be doing with the trust fund. But we also made this you know, we asked them to put this program together, and it's not funded. So I could see us funding, you know, all or part of this in this round. But then again, asking the city to find it. Don't come back again. Don't make this body your annual source of funding for this. And put it back on the commission to find a different funding source. It's a great program. It is helping us. It's taking people out of the shelter and getting them housed outside of the shelter. And, you know, right or wrong, these people take a lot of coaching and a lot of wraparound services because some of them, the shelter is their normal home. They've been there more than a year. That is home. It's a traumatic experience. So to get them to be able to move out and be successful, it takes a lot of wraparound. And they're being highly successful. I think she said, I'm going to probably misquote the number, but in the 70 to 80% successful rate of people staying out of the shelter through this program. So we're getting them into affordable housing, you know, we're getting them into better situations. So it's a great program. Again, this is not the right place I don't think to fund it, but maybe we need to in this round. Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah.
Edith, yes.
You know, sometimes I feel at a disadvantage because I'm not here all the time. I mean, I'm in and out of the community. This is one time that I think it's an advantage. Because I don't know who it is that we asked them to put this program together. I don't know who the "we" is. Because I too feel it's, from what I read, it is a great program. But I do ask about the philosophy. What is our philosophy as a fund, as an agency? I mean, as a board. It seems like a United Way request. Are we a United Way agency that gives funding for a budget? Because this feels like a budgeted item, a staff position. And are we going to be a United Way agency that comes in every year that you ask for a budgeted item? And I think that's a philosophical question that at some point we have to ask ourselves about this kind of request. We didn't ask ourselves that last time. We didn't ask ourselves this time before we got the request. And I don't know if we can say no based on not having had that conversation. But I think it's a conversation we have to have. Because I'm not sure that funding staff positions is the role of the Housing Trust Fund. And that's what this is asking us to do, fund a staff position. Although a very important staff position, I think it's a wonderful program, but I'm simply asking, is that what the intent is of the Housing Trust Fund? So I am completely where you are, and that was my struggle with, I wanted to fund the direct service piece of the vouchers, but the other piece, I really struggled with.
I have to agree that I had these similar types of questions as I was thinking through on this program, but I also remembered a previous ask and the underfunding that was experienced by them last time. But I know there's a precedent that New Horizons has been funded by the AHAB board, and when it first started, we can see that in the records. Now, who asked for it to be set up, I don't know, but it does look like it has been historically supported through this body. But all of us, many of us who are fairly new members to this body have kind of restructured a few things, and so maybe we need to clarify a little bit, just like you were saying, as from a point of view that you brought up. I also felt like with this particular project, the instrument was problematic, the scoring instrument was. It did kind of maybe artificially look like it was less important because of the numbers we had to use to do that, and so I struggled with that, the matrix, but we've already kind of talked about that a little bit. So.
Other comments on this issue?
I think, that's a struggle we're gonna go through with all of the non-capital projects. I mean, that's, are we here to create and provide housing, or are we here to fund a large, or a structure around that? I mean, that's what the two non-capital projects do, is they support and fund around that, but they're not the specific of creating housing.
If I might, Mr. Chair, I might just offer this in maybe helping to frame your discussion a little bit. So in your notice of funding availability, you did identify all of your short-term goals. In your short-term goals, you do have things that are service-related. I think what this conversation is getting at, which will evolve over time, I think that what you're asking for in these notices of funding availability will likely narrow, and it may change depending on your track record of what you fund over time and that kind of thing. And those are all discussions to have. I think that this board, when you consider your notice of funding availability, that's the time really to do that, and or in adjusting your goals, that you're passing those recommendations on to the city commission that they can weigh in on. At this point, your NOFA is fairly broad, with the exception of saying that you were looking to have a 2019 impact, but it basically allows for something in all of those areas that would meet the goals. But this board's responsibility is to look at the applications that you've received based on what you think are the most pressing priorities to make that recommendation. And I think that goes to the piece of your policy where you're articulating your reasons why you made delineations the way that you did.
Now, as I went back and read our vote, that supportive services word, that is so broad. I mean.
It is.
We are gonna have a very difficult time, because that's, you name it, that's
Right.
everything.
If I can go sideways just one more step. You were mentioning, Tom mentioned the two non-capital projects, and I noticed that staff had kind of issued the understanding that Independence Inc. was a capital, and in their application, they referred to themselves as a non-capital. So maybe there's some definitional issues that we want to make sure about next time. But so if we're talking about making units affordable and accessible, then that project itself and the need for funding was a positive situation for me, because if they're permanently accessible, then that's increasing the number of units that are available to that population, especially when there's the income restrictions that are being attached to that project. So just like to point that out.
I think that's an interesting note on how on how the definitions as we work with them every day don't maybe fit that really well. I happen to think of it as a capital project. They're providing a service, but the service they're providing is they're modifying a home by making it accessible for seniors or those with disabilities, whatever they might be. And those improvements are going to attach to the home, be part of the real estate. I think of that as a capital investment. But what they're doing for people is providing a service. So I can see how it's easy for us to get tripped up with kind of the nomenclature, and it's probably more of an issue for us for our scoring purposes than it is for respondents, because I expect them to describe their programs to us, their project, the way they see fit, and then it's on us to put it in the right box. I will share a personal perspective on the Housing Authority Family Promise voucher request. I feel I've been reached out to by a couple of our commissioners who have talked to me about the formation of this initiative and how it is for them a part of trying to address some of the capacity issues at the shelter. We know there's been turnover in the management of the shelter. There's questions of the long-term viability of the business plan, et cetera. I think the hope of some of the city commissioners is that the voucher program can provide a relief valve of sorts, at least in the short term, as they work through some broader issues associated with the shelter. I'm going to be like Patrick. I'm going to date an idea for a moment. This might be one of those where every 5 minutes you get up and move to another table, but just see how long I hang on to this idea. But personally, I would be favorably. I would look favorably on the request for an additional $50,000 for the voucher. I probably would not support right now the request for continuing the staff person. And the fact that the staff person started in March and this contract, this funding would not be used until March of 2020 makes it easy to say, that's kind of like some of the capital projects. Is not really a timely request. It's not an investment that's going to be put to work in 2019. But the vouchers, I believe, would be. or could be. So I, but then I like enough of all of these projects that the $250,000 we have available, I can't spread it around 2 or 3 times to get everything supported that I want. That's the challenge. Other comments about any individual project or any of the individual policy issues that come up when we discuss them? Does anyone have a recommendation for what our support should be?
Looks like he's ready to say something.
I can make a recommendation if you're requesting one.
Chair would welcome a
Okay.
recommendation.
Okay, so do you want that in the form of a motion, or do you want it? It's just a recommendation for us to discuss, and then too early for a motion?
Yeah, I think it would be too early. I think
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, so here's what I would probably have, for having listened to what everybody has said here today. I would defer acting on the pin lofts. I would defer acting on Wheatland, but I would ask them to resubmit because it's a highly rated project, in my opinion. I would fund the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority Family Promise Voucher Program at least $50,000, if not a little more. And I would fully fund the Tenants to Homeowners Beatnik project and the LHFH projects. And that puts you at $250,000 in funding.
And so.
And Independence Inc., I would not fund that. My only reasoning for that is it doesn't put any units on the ground. I get it's a need. And it's a good project. I'm not saying it's not a good project. It's a good cause and everything, but I don't think it puts new units on the ground.
Reactions?
Okay.
So 50, 150, 0, 0, 0, 50 is going across the.
That fairly closely mirrors what I had been thinking in terms of how, maybe not the specific dollars, but pretty close. I mean, that kind of a split up. I think that's a good suggestion.
Because this will be important later. Give us a couple of bullet points for each of those, and you have, just restate them here a bit so that we can make sure we collect comments to properly support, to make transparent, clear, and understandable our decision-making.
Yeah. I think on the first one, it puts one new house on the ground. It rehabs another house, and I'm a little conflicted on that because it's a house that probably received subsidy when it was originally built, and I think I don't think we're gonna set any precedent, but it's not a good practice to have a second subsidy on.
I think I had asked that question when they presented, and they said that it did not have subsidy. I could be wrong on that, but I thought they said that.
It wasn't subsidized from us, definitely. But that program does solicit donations to get those houses built and that kind of stuff. So it did receive, I mean, it wasn't. So anyway, that gave me a little, maybe think about that. I'm not saying I wouldn't fund
Teeny
it.
little bit of heartburn.
A teeny little of heartburn. I just said I don't want a project that we funded, to come back and then ask for funding to keep it going. I think the Beatnik project's a really good one, and it shows joint effort between a for-profit developer and a not-for-profit agency to get some houses on the ground at a slightly subsidized by the developer, slightly subsidized by us. It's a mixed neighborhood where you're gonna have both, for-profit units and not-for-profit units in the same block, intermixed. I just liked a lot about that project.
I think also, as we've talked about some of these things that we're trying to do to make some shifts in development standard zoning practices, it meets,
Right,
it's
it's
direct.
a R3 development,
Yeah.
or R, I'm probably saying that wrong. Which is one of the first ones of those in town with the small lots. It's not the doubled up lots like we did, but it's a small lot development.
Yeah, and I would consider that an innovative
Yeah,
move.
as much as anything, it demonstrates that partnership, and if we can get a few of those under our belts and demonstrate that, maybe we'll have other developers that'll be more interested in talking with us, about those kind of projects. Wheatland, they said they didn't need the funding until the next round, and I think we'll have adequate funding in the next round, and it's a great project. But if we can defer it and fund something else that's in the hopper, ready to go, that's why I would defer. I would say that's to me, a deferment into the next, in November. We're talking about November. We're not talking about a year from now.
With the proviso that we would encourage them to come
To
back.
resubmit,
Yeah.
encourage them to
Yeah.
resubmit the project. And, I might even add that if we can get those to permanent affordability, that would really be nice.
So,
in the-
and I
Yeah.
apologize for
No,
continuing.
no,
to
no,
interrupt you,
this is
but
great discussion.
Perhaps that's something that we can discuss over the next couple of months is there a way to provide for permanent
Mm-hmm.
affordability in our, in how we frame what we ask?
Right. And to me, it gets to that added value. What are the trust funds adding to that project that wouldn't otherwise be there? Independence Inc., again, that's a great cause. I'm not sure it fits the trust fund as well as some of the other things. It does serve a specific population that we have targeted. I agree with that. And if that's important, we could find funding for it, Ohio, Penn Lofts, again, I didn't even score them personally because they didn't ask for funds. And I didn't feel like I wanted to set a precedent of scoring future projects to score them against this set of projects. There'll be a whole different set of projects in the next thing, and they may get a completely different score based on the other projects we're reviewing. So I just didn't feel like it was, they didn't ask for funding, so I wouldn't fund them. And Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority, again, it was a project that, however it got created, it's a great project. It supports housing, it supports getting people from an unhoused situation to a housed situation. I personally, I would have funded it at 100%, but listening to the discussion today, I get a feeling that there's, I knocked that down to 50 based on the conversation today. I don't know, I think the city commission basically put it back on us and asked us to fund it last time we didn't fund it, and why we didn't. I feel strongly about getting it funded, but again, I want to find a permanent funding solution. I don't want them coming back to AHAB every time. If for the staff position, we need to find a different funding source,
And I certainly agree with that. I think you and Edith have both raised this issue of not wanting our housing trust fund dollars to be used on an ongoing basis to staff up a person to provide services. That doesn't preclude me from supporting a project that might have a service component and funding
Right.
the person that's providing that service, but I would prefer that our dollars be used to launch those programs and get them up and demonstrating their value, and then move the funding of the staff person to
Permanent.
to some other permanent source of funds. We, several of you have expressed some comment, at least I've interpreted as a comment that favors investing in hard assets, put more affordable housing in the ground as opposed to doing some other things. I very much support that. But I do see that there are some immediate needs that, there really aren't options to voucher programs for addressing short-term needs. It's at the end of 10 years, if we point to the accomplishments of what we've done with our trust fund dollars, and one of those items on the list is we provided $50,000 or $75,000 a year to support a voucher program that put people in rental units that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to afford. I'm not embarrassed to have that on the list. Our study showed that that was a significant need, and I wouldn't do that with the majority of our funds. I'd feel like we'd shortchanged the long-term problem. But there are short-term needs that I don't want us to walk away from. Similarly, I agree with Edith in looking at the value of the residential modification programs for the disabled and seniors who need assistance. One of the most important things we can probably do with our housing stock is to keep the affordable housing that we have. Now, the city has a modest program to help with things like weatherization for those that can't afford it and some home repairs and whatnot. I don't think that our trust fund dollars should become substitutes for that fund. Are there ways that we can leverage that fund in conjunction with some other non-city grant dollars or foundation sources? I don't know, but I would like to, I think there are merit in those programs. I would like to investigate what we can do as advocates or through policy and through our funding, try to expand the reach and scope of those programs because they don't yet meet all of the community need. It would be great if we could find some way of helping them without just giving them dollars so they can scale up. I don't know what that might be, but there, we have a lot of smart folks here in town. Let's put our, maybe we can find some ideas that help leverage the effectiveness, or if we decide to give them funds in the future, can better leverage our dollars into a higher value impact somehow. I don't know what that would be, but those are the kinds of innovations that I would like to be looking for.
What I heard from Independence Inc. last time was that this request was a result of some change in policy that happened. And so it is in some cases an unusual request that came out of the change of that policy. I would want to say to Independence Inc., they're going to have to address that change in policy. Otherwise, they're going to be back here every single time. Because they're not going to be able to canvass every year, just like they can't this time. And I did hear them say at the end of their request, they were hoping to put in place something. I actually even think maybe it was some fundraising that might address this kind of issue, because this came up as a result of a change in policy. So I'm hoping that this is not a kind of continual request, but an emergency thing. But the only disagreement I would have with you would be not giving anything to Independence Inc., because I think that the accessibility and allowing people to stay in their own homes or in the rental property is important. So.
And I understand that. Where would those dollars come from? As Monty has kind of looked at his piece of it, that's the whole pie. So how do you shift those wedges a little bit so that?
I would shift it by taking some from tenants to homeowners. Reducing that some, maybe 25,000 or even 50,000. But I would do it from there.
And did I understand? Did I understand correctly that Tenants to Homeowners still has a event to come to raise funds? That they still have some fundraising left to do? Was that a correct understanding?
They had that project, if they bought all 7 lots, I believe, then the developer was going to make a donation back to essentially help them pay for the last lot. That's what I understood out of that proposal. I don't know if I'm not aware of any other fundraiser, but I certainly don't, not expert.
Yeah, I was just trying to, that was my recollection looking at their.
Yeah.
My notes about tenants to homeowners was that they would be working on 2 houses at a time for a total of 7, that they could be ready as soon as August to get started and get some of them up, but they'd wrap up in 2020. So, for what that's worth. I put that out there in support of what Edith is saying myself. As a person who benefits from modifications to my home, then I think it's really important because it continues to help my household be productive, and because they did experience a change in their funding dollars and the requirements to get those. If nothing else, it could be a tide them over kind of a situation until more research is done and they do, in fact, with our support, find ways of funding, different ways of funding this in the future.
And being that all these are really good projects, and to the point of trying to nuance all these little differences, for good or bad, I felt like the tenants to homeowners request for lots was just a little bit different than direct housing. Although very worthy, I just had to nuance that a little bit in my mind, that that's just a touch different. And maybe worth noting.
At the tenants homeowners application information is in the deck. It's listed as page 5 of 19. In my document, it's the second page, so I don't know what I've done with the first 3 pages. But they talk about the question is, will these funds be used to leverage other funds? If yes, please describe. If I might, I'll just take a quick minute to. They say, yes, these funds will be used to request an additional $200,000 in subsidy. This includes, and I didn't do the math to see if this all adds up, but this includes federal home loan bank grants, $70,000, for-profit developer donation of $20,000, tenants to homeowner annual event donations of $30,000, home, that's capital HOME, funds for home buyer purchase, $50,000, and tenants to homeowner equity, $30,000. This would provide $350,000 in subsidy. I believe that includes our dollars.
It does.
That would allow the project to sell homes at $50,000 below market value. And then they've done an interesting thing. They've forecasted how many homes might benefit over 50 years, recognizing there's turnover in homes like this every, 5, 6, 7 years. And they said, at this price, we can leverage another $700,000 from buyers to finance the $1.05 million ownership project and put 7 households into new homes. These homes will be in trust, so they're permanently affordable. And this subsidy will grow with appreciation to serve, and their use of the word appreciation there is a little bit off-putting to me because I'm a financial institutions kind of guy a little bit, and I think of appreciation a different way. But the subsidized will grow with appreciation to serve 70 more households in the next 50 years, meaning they project that over the course of the next 50 years, another 70 households will be in and out of those homes.
10 people.
Yeah, so they've done a more deep dive in how our dollars might be leveraged than other
Does that
folks.
mean-
They've got a little bit more complicated financing arrangement.
When they say they're gonna use our funds to then leverage funds, does that mean that those other funds are already secured, or they have to then go to the next step to secure the that wasn't clear to me.
Scott, did you have any, what was the timing, Brad, what was the timing of their, what was the score we gave them for,
The 700 that they're discussing there is the mortgages, private mortgages that the buyer will go out and receive from local
Yeah.
lenders.
yeah, yeah.
But I think the question is around the 200,000, is that secured? In other words, are the home funds secured? I mean, some of it is, obviously, but,
The home that they're specifically mentioning there.
They said there was an award date, but does that mean they already have it secured?
Yes, that 50,000 in the
Okay.
first-time homebuyer program has already been allocated
Okay.
out of the 2018 city money from HUD.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'd be supportive of a little less for tenants to homeowners, but maybe for a different reason. And one of the downsides of watching it on video is I don't get to see all of your reactions. One of the things I remembered was hearing that 7 homes would be built in 1 year. And then noting on the construction feasibility that staff has given it a 3, because it's still, I mean, the amount of things that have to happen to make those 7 properties be built in the next year. And, you know, I'm interested in Paul's reaction to that. I mean, because, I mean, the public, they've gone to the planning commission, but it hasn't gone to the city commission yet. You know, I've seen some communication about the community being concerned about it. I think we've heard some of that. So, you know, how fast will that go through the process? Do they have the funding in place? Can they, and maybe you can build 7 homes in a year. I don't know. That sounds like a lot to me, but that's where I look to you for a little bit of advice.
Certainly it's feasible. I don't know what their staff model looks like and how they plan to ramp up and attack it, but smaller homes go quicker.
Okay.
So was your impression they were gonna do all 7 at once? I thought they were talking about doing
no,
2
they're
at a time.
they're doing them 2 at a time.
2 at a time.
2 or 3.
Okay. So but they were all to be built by August 2020? Is that what I heard?
Did she say, 12 to 18 months, I think they said, is what I'm recalling. We have notes.
That's what I remember.
Let me look at my notes here from the meeting.
And they are not strangers to that process. I mean, they've done the same thing on Ryan Court, they did it. You know, the original hand edition was around, I mean, that's what they've done. So I expect that they have systems in place, that they have, you know, I would have confidence that if they say they can get it done in 12 to 18 months, in 18 months, you're probably gonna be looking at seven homes on that property.
I believe the comment was by fall of 2020.
Yeah, so 15 months would be, I mean,
It's 13 houses, 7 that are permanently affordable.
they are not doing the other,
They're not doing the others.
no, they are only doing the 7 of them, and then the private developer is doing the market rate homes. So, Patrick, you say you would be in favor of giving them a little bit less. What number?
Oh, I think what I heard proposed was maybe, you know, do we give Independence Inc. 25,000, you know, I mean, does that give it, do we wiggle
Yeah.
between the 2 of those, between tenants to homeowners, and is that our, what did you say, pieces of the pie?
Pieces of the pie? Yeah, I mean, it's just how you shift your wedges.
Yeah.
So I then would like to make a motion
Yes, sir.
based on Monty's numbers there. I would move that we grant 125,000 to the tenants to homeowner project, that we grant the 100,000 to the, I'm sorry, make sure I get my numbers right here. We grant 25,000 to Independence Inc., that we give Habitat for Humanity 50,000, and that we also, the New Horizons at 50, I think that comes out right. Is that right? Yes. Yeah, New Horizons project, $50,000.
Did you have a specific part of New Horizons that you were hoping to fund, since that's a 2-part? You looking for the vouchers or the staffing?
The vouchers piece of the puzzle.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Discussion?
Would we be better to fully fund Independence and take tenants to 100? Or does that do more damage than good?
I don't know. Anyone know? Have an opinion?
Well, my question would be, will that negatively impact tenants to homeowners project and their ability to do their project and gain their funding?
Get my application back out.
The one note that I have that if they weren't fully funded, the response was that fewer affordable units would be built. So I don't know if their proposal has additional detail, but that was what was specifically stated during the presentation.
So, I mean, looking at the application, they're relying on, if they buy all 7 lots, they're relying on the donation from the developer to buy the part of the last lot. So if we cut them by 25, I mean, if they can find 25,000 somewhere, they can finish all 7 lots if they can find it somewhere, right? If we cut them by 50, I think they would have a hard time finding another 50. You know, they might find 25 and get that last lot. I think if we fund them by 50, they probably don't buy 2 lots, and you're down to 5 instead of 7. So, I mean, I think, to your point, at some point, you do damage their project to the point that it really loses some of its value.
I think that's a good point.
If you're looking for other funds, I think I'd look to the Habitat. You know, they're doing 1 new unit and 1 rehab.
Do you think if they could find an additional 25?
Maybe they can find partial funding for the rehab, you know, or something, I don't know. I would be more,
I'm generally in agreement with the motion. I guess I should have asked earlier, if we funded the vouchers for Family Promise, do we have confidence that they'll have the staff to divvy it up, or does that take a lot of man-hours to deal with that kind of allocation?
Well, apparently they have 1 full-time staff member that was hired in March, utilizing funds that we that we authorized in November, so they probably didn't draw on them until a month or 2 later. And I don't know how the dollars actually flow out of the city and what the timing is. But the second $50,000 wouldn't be used by them until they were funding that staff position beginning March of 2020. They could come back in our fall funding round and make a separate, fresh request for that if they choose.
And while they could certainly do that, I think that part of the signal which we are sending is we'd like you to find a way to fund that position if you could without coming back to us for.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, and so, I mean, that's a signal that we're sending, is saying, we want to support you, but we'd also like to see that piece of the puzzle put together in a different way.
Yeah. So I think the answer to your question is they wouldn't be using that staff person money to ramp up and hire a second person. They would be using it to continue the employment of the person they have currently hired.
Yeah, I just didn't know if that would create a further workload for whoever's in place already, or if it would just be within their typical operating procedures. It's just a general type of question.
And that position was a case manager, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
think the voucher program might not necessarily be run by that person.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would assume,
I
not
think
understanding
that's
how the
right. I
business
think
model works.
the
But
housing authority is probably running the voucher program.
yeah,
And the caseworker is working on,
the supportive services and the transitional pieces to get the
Mhm.
person educated and kind of looped in so that they can then take that next step.
Mr. Chairman, that's our understanding too. You have a representative from the Housing Authority here if you want to pose that question.
So
Yes.
this program, hi, again, Nikki Danicki. This program has a feature that requires that social service piece because of the needs of the vulnerable population served. And if you may recall our discussion, the match was that Family Promise would also provide that case manager for that second year. However, with all the changes and struggles at the shelter right now, Dana has given 2 staff members, so they're doing 80 hours worth of time currently. And so that was one of the reasons we requested that second one
But
during this
Nikki,
time.
To the specific question of the voucher program is run by the Housing
So we do all,
Authority,
mhm.
not by Family Promise, so that would be included in your normal, I mean, if you were to receive 50,000 for
Yeah.
vouchers, you would be able to manage that without adding any staff?
Correct. So our staff processes all of the lease-up documentation and financials, and part of the 5% admin fees broken down in that, so inspections. So.
Just knowing that they've heard the discussion here, I might suggest that we consider granting the $50,000, but let them decide what the best use is to get the most out of that $50,000, with the understanding that this is our reasoning behind it. You know, hearing the discussion here and our reasoning for only granting 50,000, but to allow a program to do the most, I'm not sure I'm the expert on that. And forward that funding with a comment, I guess, is here's how we got here, and let them figure out how to use that funding to the most impact.
Yeah, I'm not quite comfortable with that yet.
That's fair.
I think if I were making a philanthropic contribution to an organization I believed in, I would be comfortable giving them that discretion on how to best use the dollars coming in. But I think we've got some pretty clear, broad stated goals, and need to address this issue that have been raised by several of you about not becoming a source of ongoing funding for a staff person. So I would have some discomfort with just a grant that says, you know, go serve those folks how best you deem appropriate. I think we need to have a little bit more structure to our gifts than that. Very, very valuable program, but I think we need to go ahead and make the decision of do we want to
And I think that's the current motion.
fund one, or, yeah, that is the current motion.
Although, I mean, we do have some discussion, which we haven't really concluded here, around fully funding the Independence, Inc. request and reducing the Habitat
Yes.
funding. So, I mean, my original amendment, and if I need to do a friendly amendment to my motion rather, was for 100,000 to the Habitat project. Do we then, as we're talking about doing with tenants, do we reduce that by $25,000 and move that piece of the wedge to the Independence request? Discuss.
And then
I didn't follow all
Yeah.
that. Can you read across the top the
Yes.
amounts that you
Yeah, so
are
it's
proposing?
for the Tenants to Homeowners project. I'm sorry. No, never mind. Never mind. My numbers I had numbers that I was working with in my head and not looking at the sheet, which I should
Can we
have
just
done.
restate the original motion?
Yes, the original motion had us fully funding the Habitat Humanity at $50,000, 150 to the Tenants to Homeowners, and the,
125 to tenants to homeowners.
right, but yeah, that's right, I'm sorry. 125 there, 25 to Independence, and 50 to LDHCA.
Mhm.
So that.
And then, Paul, did you want to, I'm coming back to you because you had asked, do we want to do something different with 25, am I correct? Or does this reflect what you had
I am.
I've lost track of where we were in those proposals. Does this reflect the change that you were asking about?
I think you had asked about taking about giving tenants 100 instead of 125.
Yeah,
And going to 50 for independents, right? Or,
Yes, that was what I just wanted to discuss,
Okay.
but I'm generally in agreement with the lay of the land here,
okay,
with the motion.
okay.
If we reduced habitat dollars, we would then
Yeah,
just be reducing the top two score,
yeah,
and the city commission might look at us sideways, but again, we didn't say the scores are the only factors, but.
We have a motion and
we
a
have
second.
yep. And now we've had full discussion.
And I want to go back to Monty's proposal, though, of the 50,000 and that discussion, because Ron, you didn't agree with Monty's proposal and then moved forward fairly quickly, and I agree with Monty.
Okay,
We should
yeah.
give the organization the opportunity to decide how to leverage those funds. For all of the things that we've talked about, because I hear her saying that they've got 2 case managers in there right now because they're worried about the success rate of being able to get those people moved through. And so if they feel that they need to do that, I think that that's their expertise. I think we could say a strong preferential to the vouchers, but let them make some of those decisions. So I was just throwing out, I agree completely with the numbers that are on the table for each of the organizations, but I would be with Monty on let the organization make the decision on that $50,000.
And that was part of my motion, so I would do a friendly amendment if we agree to it,
Yeah,
to
I
remove
don't think we had
the.
full discussion on that.
Sure. I'm
And
glad you
so-
came back to that, so
Yeah.
thank you. And others in agreement or others not in
It's us.
agreement where?
I'm actually not, but I would go along with it.
I feel like I'm not the expert on how they should spend the money. If we believe in the program, we believe in these organizations, let's don't earmark it, you know.
And I'd be interested in hearing why you would support it as we have it now, in other words.
Because I support the vouchers,
Mhm.
period. I just support giving the voucher, and I like the clarity of the message.
I would be supportive of, I guess we're now calling it Monty's idea, so. Monty's amendment. I mean, one of the things I think that makes it challenging.
You do that, you'll get named the next chair.
Challenging about this one and tying it just to the vouchers is that it is contingent upon city and county funding as well. That is weaved into this, and that is happening as we speak and as we're making a recommendation. So, you know, Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority may change their plan based on where they get funding there, which is to, I think, Ida's point of, this makes it a little tricky when we're providing services. I mean, we're getting hit on, that was not the right way to say that. We're being asked for funds from multiple sources, and I think that makes this tricky. So I'm in favor of giving them some flexibility based on the fact that there's other funding sources at play in case management.
Yeah, this will be, this is and I can live with this. It's not that big a deal for me. But I think it's an interesting challenge, and will be an ongoing challenge living in this environment where we know what's going on with the shelter. We know with the city commission, the county commission, and separating and living in the role for this role only. And that will be very challenging to sort of say, have a myopic view of what is our role without all of the other stuff that's going on. It'll be very interesting for us to see if we can do that. It's difficult. It is very difficult.
Paul, Tom, how do you feel about the recommendation to,
I'm comfortable with the Monty amendment.
Yeah, I think potentially the reduction in funding is a significant message in itself, that we could leave it to their discretion from there.
do, Monty, you want to make a formal motion?
Well,
We
Just
have to
need a-
vote on the motion.
We've got,
we've got a motion and a
Got a
second, so either those two could amend the motion in the second,
yes.
or you could kill it. You have some options, but it sounds like you've got friendly amendments
Yeah, right, and so as the motion sits,
Would the
we
maker
are,
of the motion,
as the motion sits right now, we have designated for the New Horizons program, the vouchers only. I would move, or I would suggest a friendly amendment that we remove that piece of my motion. And then I think you as seconder get to say I agree with it.
Actually, I second.
Oh, what, yeah,
I will second that.
okay.
okay. So the proposal on the table has been modified. Any further discussion on the underlying proposal? And I think it's been reviewed a couple of times, we're all pretty clear. Should we review the numbers one more time? Anyone, any ambiguity here? Tenants to homeowners, 125. The New Horizons Initiative, 50,000, undirected. Independence,
No.
Yeah, no,
No.
did I,
Yeah,
Miss
tenants at
it
home.
somewhere.
no,
No, we didn't.
No, that's
We
right.
had you.
He's just a
Did I
different.
miss it?
He's in a different order.
Okay.
yeah, it's just,
Independence, 25,
Yes.
and Habitat for Humanity, 50.
correct.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. Excellent work. Agenda. Quick updates. We have a potential joint meeting with the Planning Commission on August 14th, 7:30.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes,
may,
sir.
Planning Commission meets monthly at what we call a mid-month meeting. The fortunate part about it is that it's 7:30 a.m. The good news is that we get to invite sometimes and collaborate with different entities in the city and county. And so we are putting out an invitation to this board to do a joint work session type meeting with our Planning Commission, since there are going to be a lot of intersections that we think you're going to have in the future with them. And it may be good to get together, talk about the toolkit a little bit, some of those items, kind of get to know each other's roles and responsibilities in affordable housing. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be this date, but it's something we're trying to schedule as we juggle all the schedules of boards.
And this would be incremental to, not in lieu of our regular scheduled
Correct.
meeting on August 12th.
It would be an addition.
Yes.
And that's right, you all meet the 12th, so it would be a couple of days after that. We could work for a different venue as well, or invite them to this midday meeting. I'm assuming we're not going to get 100% participation, no matter which way we go, probably, but we'll strive for it.
What's the typical time?
It's about 90 minutes, 7:30 to 9
On the 12th.
on the 14th.
And
The 12th is 11 to 1, this
That's
meeting.
us, okay.
so this is the regularly scheduled meeting.
Correct.
We would be only a component part then of their meeting?
You'd be the primary part
Okay.
of that meeting. We don't have any other agenda items, I think, for that. We would set it aside
Okay.
to the meeting for you.
How many know they would not be able to attend? 1, 2, 3
Not
probably.
certain yet.
Yeah.
I'm a maybe as well.
I have it.
Okay.
Can't attend
Okay.
Harvest
They might get half of us. You know, not a bad start. Maybe a little more, okay. Is there any other new business to come before the advisory board at this time?
I don't have a new business, but just a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Having voted and determined the dispersal, we need to report this to the city commission, and I know the big emphasis has been to write rationale. Who is going to do that, do the rationale part?
We were really hoping you'd stay.
Well, you've got
Well, I
a
wondered
couple,
if
now
you all
that,
have
one of the
notes.
changes we've made is videotaping
Yeah.
your meeting. That's
Mhm.
probably the
That's-
primary way, just verbatim, just see it as it happens.
Okay,
That, what we do, I think we post minutes
yeah,
and those sorts of things.
and that could be that
So-
form.
The video is really that's the value of videotaping these.
Yeah, Diane and Scott, do you feel as though we've provided
I believe you.
adequate
Had
discussion
really
and,
good
and
discussion.
more openly discussed the context of all of our decision-making today?
Yes, and I think that we can relay that as well with the draft minutes, with the cover memo that transmits the recommendations
Okay.
of the board.
That sounds good.
And we're always available to answer questions when commissioners call, so. Okay. Yes, sir.
For consideration of future discussion on our next NOFA, I would propose that we discuss or talk about a format that we can give to the applicants that's either like online or some way where we can have we can receive back a format from the applicants that's all the same. Something that's like blank that they can fill out, but we get something that's consistent and
The
the same.
templated version.
Template, thank you. And then if there's a way that we could discuss or approach the, how to nuance the additional funds that applicant might have that doesn't penalize them within the matrix, maybe, I don't know.
Mr. Chair, it could be at your next meeting, you begin to have those kind of discussions leading up to the
Yeah.
work on the next NOFA. There's probably some other things too, and we could just kind of put all those on the table
Yeah,
and
future,
go through
whenever's-
those.
whenever's
You've got a
best.
good opportunity here at your next couple meetings.
When does this funding recommendation go to the city commission?
I think our calendar called for that next meeting, their next meeting, which is July the
Tomorrow.
16th.
Oh, yeah, tomorrow they've got working session, don't they?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so we would be posting materials later this week or at least transmitting your motion, and then we may follow up with the draft minutes and things like that that may not be quite ready. The video is ready immediately after this meeting, so it's live.
Paul, I think your comment about, I think we'll be scrutinizing our NOFA announcements and doing everything we can to fine tune that, make it easier for the applicant, make it easier for us to see all the information so it looks more apples and apples, and we can compare diverse kinds of projects fairly across the board. Yeah. I hope we have a lot of discussion between now and the next release on how to fine tune and do that. Thank you all very, very much.
This was so fun.
And have a great week. We are adjourned.
Thank you.